Hope everybody's doing okay. This video is for question number 9. Is it ever okay to digitally alter a photo? If not, why not? If sometimes, then where do you draw the line? Use examples and be as specific as possible in your answer. For this, you will want to download this. Go to this link here where it says use examples. Click on the link, it'll take you here. You'll download this PowerPoint, and up will come this handy dandy little PowerPoint on digital manipulation. So let's go through this PowerPoint, this is a super interesting topic, and I really wish we could have done this PowerPoint in person, but hey, that's where we are. So the question is it ever okay to digitally alter a photo? If not, why not? If sometimes, where do you draw the line? So let's buckle up and look at this PowerPoint together on digital manipulation. If you'll notice in this photo, which we did talk about in class, but photos have been altered actually before digital technology for photos existed. This photo, if you'll remember from our photojournalism history PowerPoint, this is from 1970. If you'll notice, there's a difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. This wasn't digitally altered because digital photojournalism wasn't happening at the time. They went into the dark room, and if you'll notice above Marianne Vecchio's head, Marianne Vecchio is the one screaming, looking at the student who was shot. Above her head, there's a pole in the photo on the right, and the pole was in the dark room. They did a technique when you develop photos in a dark room. You can do a technique called dodging and burning, and you can actually manipulate the photo without using digital technology. It's way more complicated. It's way harder. It takes much longer, but you could actually manipulate photos in the pre-internet, pre-digital era. So manipulating images has been going on for a lot longer than we've had Photoshop. But it was harder to do before Photoshop. It's much easier to do now. When this photo ran in 1970, they did take out the pole, and I personally think that this was wrong for news outlets to do. And I don't think it would happen today. And here's an example. Just 10 years later, in the early 1980s, National Geographic got in big trouble for this. This was the cover of their magazine. By the way, National Geographic is one of the most important magazines for photojournalists. And this magazine has, of course, the pyramids in Egypt. And if you look at the bottom of this picture, you can see people riding camels, the silhouettes of people riding camels in front of the pyramids. Well, it turns out that this was an early example of manipulating a photo digitally using Photoshop or its predecessor, Photoshop's predecessor. So even though this is in the early 1980s, this was digitally altered. But National Geographic got in trouble for doing this, and they ended up apologizing. The photographer said, well, even though I wasn't standing in, what they did was they shoved the pyramids together. The pyramids were not actually, they didn't look like this in the original photo. But because National Geographic is kind of has a vertical layout, they pushed the pyramid on the left over and they pushed the pyramid on the right over so they're closer together, and then they put the camel silhouettes in front of the pyramids. They got in trouble for this, and I think this was probably the last time. Well, no, I don't want to say that, but this was one of the first big examples of a major news outlet engaging in digital manipulation, and they got in big trouble for it. Here's a really interesting example of digital manipulation, and it's from a magazine called TV Guide. Also, this is from the 80s, and it says Oprah, the richest woman on TV. Now, this is actually digitally manipulated. This is Oprah Winfrey's head, but it's not Oprah Winfrey's body. So my question so far to you is which of these is okay, if any of them? I personally would argue it's wrong to alter a photo, even if it's something small, like taking out the pole in this photo. I think it's wrong, even if maybe the photographer could have been standing at a certain place and could have gotten the pyramids from this angle. He didn't. This was altered. And so therefore I think it's wrong. Why? Because we're telling you that this is the truth, but yet we're lying to you when we take an object out. We're telling you this is the truth, but we're lying to you when we say that the photographer saw this from his lens. He didn't see this. And I think we're still lying to the public here when we say this is Oprah Winfrey, because it's her head, but it's not her body. This is a magazine called Texas Monthly. The same thing happened here. This was the governor of Texas at the time. Her name was Ann Richards, and it's got her wearing white leather with fringe, leather jacket and leather pants, sitting on a motorcycle, and headline says "White Hot Mama." Ann Richards, though, this is her face, but it is not her body. That's a model's body. So far, I really believe all these things were wrong to do. Wrong to take out the pole, wrong to squeeze the pyramids together, wrong to put Oprah's head on somebody else's body, wrong to put Ann Richards' head on somebody else's body. Why? Because the public thinks that these are real photos, or at least they should think that they're real photos, because they come from news outlets and magazines. Here's another example. If anybody has seen the movie about Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, I'm temporarily forgetting the name of the movie right now, but it came out just a few years ago, and it's a super interesting movie. What happened was someone affiliated, so these were two superstar figure skaters, Olympic figure skaters, but they had a feud, and the person on the left, Tonya Harding, someone who was close to her, hired someone to club Nancy Kerrigan's legs, that's the skater on the right, to club her legs and hurt and injure her legs to help Tonya win the Olympics. Well, this was a sensational news story. It played on the news cycle for many, many days. It was a huge news story. So when people saw this cover of New York Newsday, they were like, hey, wait a minute. You mean Nancy Kerrigan and Tonya Harding are on the ice together already, even after their feud, even after Nancy Kerrigan got her legs beaten? Well, it wasn't true. This was digitally manipulated to make them look like they were skating on the ice together. Now, if you look at the caption at the bottom right, well, actually, if you look at the subhead at the bottom and then the caption in the bottom right, it says Tonya and Nancy to meet at practice. In other words, they will eventually meet. And maybe when they do meet, it might look like this. But it didn't. So this was an example where Newsday got in trouble, and I think it was misleading. Okay, Time Magazine got in trouble. Time and Newsweek are magazines that right now when people look at Time and Newsweek, they're usually looking online, but people used to get the physical copy, and they would pick up the physical copy of Time Magazine and the physical copy of Newsweek magazine. And if the story was big enough, the cover story might be the same on both Time and Newsweek. And the story of O.J. Simpson was big enough to be on both covers at once. Now, this is his mugshot. Notice the mugshots do not look the same. The mugshot on the right was not altered, but the mugshot on the left was altered. As you can tell, Time Magazine darkened OJ's face, which got Time Magazine in huge trouble because people said, hey, are you trying to say that the darker the skin, the scarier the person, because OJ was accused of killing his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson? And Time Magazine apologized, and they said they were wrong to darken the skin. They said they didn't intend for the meaning to be that the darker the skin, the scarier the person, but that is what they got in trouble for, and they ended up apologizing for it. Now, Time and Newsweek, again, in a different year, a few years later, it's another big story that captured the country's imagination, and this couple gave birth to septuplets. And so they were on the cover of both Time and Newsweek at the same time. But you'll notice this time it's Time Magazine that, it's Newsweek. Time ran the actual photo without manipulating it in any way, but Newsweek took a picture of the couple, and they did manipulate the photo. So whereas Time magazine is the one that manipulated OJ, Newsweek is the magazine that manipulated the photo of the septuplet parents. You'll notice the mom in the Newsweek photo, her teeth are perfect, but the mom in the version of the Time magazine photo, her teeth are kind of crooked and dark and look like they need work. Well, Newsweek got in trouble because they were suggesting, now maybe it came from a good place, they didn't want to make the mom look, I don't know, people with bad teeth sometimes get made fun of and they're seen as less educated or country bumpkins or something like that. So maybe Newsweek was trying to do her a favor, but the fact remains that they manipulated the photo to make it seem like she had perfect teeth when she really didn't. This is where a lot of my students say, and maybe if we were in class talking to each other, students would say, but what's the big deal? It's just teeth. Well, I would say right back to you, where do you draw the line? Because if you can manipulate teeth, why can't you manipulate everything else in the photo? So I still think all these examples are wrong. It is wrong to manipulate. You don't have to agree with me. You can say, hey, look, it's just teeth. And you can give your reasons why you don't think it's a big deal. This is an example of a New Year's Eve celebration, and it's of Times Square in New York. So we've probably seen this, a scene like this many times where it's a news anchor way up in a skyscraper overlooking Times Square, and you can see the crowd below. Well, CBS News got in trouble because here's their main anchor man, Dan Rather, who's talking about the New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square. But if you were there looking through this camera lens, if you were looking at exactly this shot, you wouldn't have seen this view. What you would have seen, if you'll notice in the top right, there's a CBS logo. Well, this is CBS News. It looks like there's a CBS electronic billboard in Times Square. There's not. What there was an NBC logo in Times Square at the time, in an electronic billboard. So in other words, it was CBS's competition. They didn't want to give free competition to their rival, so they superimposed the CBS logo over top of the NBC logo. You might say, what's the big deal? But I'm saying this might be the biggest deal of all. It's CBS News. It's supposed to be the truth. It's supposed to be newsworthy. And by altering this view, this video, they're lying to us. Okay, this is a really embarrassing example. Now, this is not a news outlet. This is the Wisconsin-Madison undergraduate application. A lot of you got catalogs from University of Tampa when you were a student, like maybe hard physical copy brochures and things from different universities. Well, here's one that the University of Wisconsin sent out. Now, all colleges and universities today want to be seen as diverse. No college in the country wants to be seen as an all-white university or a lily white campus with no diversity. So University of Wisconsin says, hey, we like this photo, but we wish there were more students of color in here. And so if you'll notice on the left, this is the one that went out. The one on the right is the original. The one on the left, they photoshopped in a black guy who wasn't even there. So they found a photo of a black student and they put it in there just so they could look more diverse. You can read about this if you Google Wisconsin application black student Photoshop or something like that. It'll come up. They've done articles about this. Wisconsin was horribly embarrassed. You might say to me, well, wait a minute, David. This isn't a news outlet. This is an undergraduate application. Maybe they don't follow the rules of photojournalism like news outlets do. Well, I still think it's wrong. I still think it's deceptive. Here is another example of the head and body problem. This was a magazine called Redbook, and this is the actress Julia Roberts. Is it Julia Roberts' head? Yes. Is it Julia Roberts' body? Yes. But it is Julia Roberts' head from 1 year and Julia Roberts' body from about 10 years earlier. So it is the same person, but it's the head and the body are 10 years apart. Again, you can tell me whether you think this was okay to do or not. Here's an example of someone who got fired for digitally altering a photo. He took if you look at the three, the one on the top is a combination of the bottom two. The one on the bottom left is one photo he took. This is of villagers in Iraq during the Iraq War. The photo on the bottom left is one photo that he took. The photo on the bottom right is another photo that he took. Both of these were good photos. Both could have run on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. Why didn't he just submit one of these two photos? It would have been fine. But no, he got greedy, and so he went into Photoshop and he manipulated these photos. So what you have on the photo on the bottom left is a soldier pointing his gun and holding up his hand. But the villager is looking away. In the photo on the bottom right, the soldier is not holding up his hand, but the villager is looking directly at the soldier. What the photojournalist really wanted was a photo of the soldier holding up his hand and the villager looking directly at him. So what did he do? He concocted the photo. He created it. He photoshopped it together. When it was discovered that he manipulated this photo, he got fired. Now, how did people eventually discover? He got it through his editors. It was published. But how did people discover it was photoshopped? Well, if you'll notice in the top photo, the photoshopped photo, the one that was published, if you'll notice in the bottom right, there's a villager sitting at the very, very bottom left. There's a villager sitting, he's wearing white, and you can see the curve of the way he's squatting there and the curve of his back. Now look slightly to the right of the soldier. You'll see the exact same villager sitting there, squatting in exactly the same way, with his back in exactly the same posture. That's how people discovered that this photo was altered. And he got fired for it. Fired. Lesson here, don't digitally alter a photo, or if you do, you better be working in advertising or a place that allows for it, because in photojournalism, you're not allowed. Now, there are times when you can digitally alter a photo and everyone knows that you are altering it. No one's fooled, no one is deceived. And here is an example from Harper's Magazine, a story called AWOL in America. And you can see AWOL means like you vanish from your platoon or whatever. You vanish from where you're stationed in the army, and you don't have permission to be gone, but you're gone. So that's called AWOL. Away without leave, I think, is what AWOL stands for. Anyway, I don't think it's deceptive to run this photo. Obviously, they digitally altered this photo to make this person halfway invisible, and they wanted this person to seem like a ghost, like he's vanishing. And unless you believe in ghosts, which Harper's wasn't trying to say, hey, look, we found a picture of a ghost. What they were trying to do is symbolize soldiers who leave without official permission. So I think that's okay, because no one is thinking that this is supposed to be real. Here's another example of someone who got fired for manipulating their photo. The original photo is on the right. The photo on the left of this Israeli airstrike, this photographer clumsily takes the Photoshop cloning tool and tries to make the smoke darker. You can see the imprint of the cloning tool in the smoke on the left, so he does a terrible job with it. People notice that it's Photoshopped, and he gets fired. Here's an example of a CBS in-house magazine. It's called Watch. And it's not technically journalism. It's an in-house publication, meaning it's public relations. This is a photo of Katie Couric, who was the anchor of CBS News at the time. And you'll notice that the photo on the left, which is the one that was published, is a little bit different. What did they do? They made her skinnier. They apologized for it. But again, you tell me. It's a public relations magazine, not a photojournalism based magazine. So you tell me. There are other examples of that kind of crawl right up to the line. They inch right up to the line of right and wrong. For example, this photo from Time magazine, they photoshopped that tear in former President Ronald Reagan's eye. That's a photoshopped tear. So you tell me whether it looks deceptive because he wasn't really crying that big of a tear, or whether you're like, oh, well, everyone knows that's a fake tear. and so on and so forth. But basically, what I want you to do is get into what is your guiding philosophy on when it's okay to manipulate a photo and when it's not. I can tell you, for wedding photographers, nobody wants the quote-unquote reality of that day. Prom photos, senior photos, for your senior year in high school, they're probably going to Photoshop anything that's imperfect, and they'll Photoshop it right out of the photo because you want to remember it as a perfect day or whatever. But if you're doing photojournalism, you really, in my opinion, should never digitally alter a photo. And if you do, often you get fired for it. But that's my opinion, and you can tell me what you think of this.